So who are ISTJs? Introverted Sensing, Thinking, Judging personality types. From the outside, they can seem cold, practical, organized, slow. But to truly understand ISTJs, we need to look into how do they understand the world. What does their worldview consist of? ISTJs are direct. It means they would prefer to go into the point. They're also responsive, meaning that they prefer other people to initiate towards them. ISTJs are driven by four main cognitive functions. First is the introverted sensing. This is how they internalize and gather information. Second function, their supportive function, is the extroverted thinking. This is how they organize the external world and make decisions by. Their third function, introverted feeling, is how they decide what matters to them personally. And their last function, fourth function, extroverted intuition, is how they entertain possibilities and alternatives. So what is introverted sensing? The ISTJ's first function. Introverted sensing is the internal concrete reality that a person perceives. And that's how the ISTJ gathers information. So they have a vast database of procedures, memories, experiences that they draw conclusions from. When a new experience comes to them, they assess that new experience based on the experiences they have had before. But this is also why they can be more focused on concrete details, because the perception of the reality is shaped by their perception of how the reality has been or should be. This is also why it's a comfort zone, and it's because there is a certain way, a certain pattern that they want to protect. So the ISTJ is always having a perception of the reality or the current moment based on either how other people have lived their experiences, information gathered from the external, and their own past experiences of how this situation is different. That's how they can notice small details changing. If you go into a room many times, you notice something is different this time. The chair has been moved. That's just because there is a certain amount of focus in that concrete physical environment from that individual subjective perspective. This explains also why ISTJs are about consistency, or at least trying to maintain some sort of consistent pattern, so that things that feel home to them, things that feel familiar to them, can be maintained. And this is also why the ISTJ wants to give other people a good experience, but not in the sense as extrovert sensing users would. ISTJ is the more toned down, they're more calm, they don't want to be the center of attention, they don't want to draw attention to them. That's why ISTJs usually prefer a style, what is seen as the average, and not trying to maybe draw too much attention to themselves. Their next function, extroverted thinking, is the function that is supporting, critical of the external order, and it wants to create structure in their lives. Extroverted thinking is kind of the organizing and decision-making engine. It's trying to ask always, what is the fastest way to get to a goal or outcome based on the facts, the knowledge we have gathered so far. Extroverted thinking is all about reliable or concrete outcomes. It's not about assessing different opportunities or alternatives. On the flip side, can be seen as kind of loving bureaucracy, loving this kind of procedures and regulations, but it is purely because extroverted thinking wants to reduce ambiguity. It does not want unclear instructions or tasks. And that's why the ISTJ is trying to gather as much information as possible from the external to support their actions, to support the fact that they want results and performance. But the funny thing about extrovert thinking, it is that it cares about the external collective mentality, the external collective assessment of things. That means that ISTJs can get fixated on accomplishing results and tasks that other people value. What ends up happening in a situation like this is that the ISTJ starts to internalize these external metrics of success to fill the void of their self-worth. In other words, the ISTJ starts to equate their own worth based on how well they fit into that social system, that social structure. That's why ISTJs really usually like to climb the basic corporate ladder or a bureaucratic government positions, high education specifically. Then their third function, introverted feeling, is the hidden function that is operating under the surface. This function is all about personal standards, emotional preference, and subjective values. Even though ISTJs feel deeply, they don't necessarily show it outwards. They like to keep their emotions private. This function is kind of the core to everything ISTJ actually does. Because if the ISTJ values personally something, they will be devoted to that. If they don't value that, they are not devoted to that. That's why even though ISTJs are seen as the most loyal, consistent type, it really matters how much personal value does a person, workplace, a situation, whatever it is, how much personal value does it hold to this ISTJ. If you want to know how does an ISTJ care about others, it's really not through this kind of expressive emotional talk, but rather through consistent, meaningful actions. And I really want to highlight that there is a way that the ISTJ will always over-rationalize their emotions. And it's just what happens if you have a lower feeling function. Even if something holds emotional value, ISTJs will communicate it as if it would be based on facts or statistics. So there is always an extrovert thinking way of saying how their introvert feeling is actually feeling. And this is also the function why ISTJs would prefer to be in places where they feel as comfortable as possible, because if they feel uncomfortable, they start to really avoid those people or those places. The last function in their cognitive function stack is the extrovert intuition, the inferior or aspirational function. And it means that this function can either aspire an ISTJ to develop further, or it can really be their weakness. And how this function manifests is that ISTJ really do not enjoy being in vague, ambiguous situations. They really would not prefer to deal with a lot of alternative possibilities, theoretical topics, patterns, abstract, hypotheticals, always like this what if scenarios. This itself makes the ISTJ feel uncomfortable, but for some ISTJs this can even be triggering or even provoke anxiety. Because, ISTJ would really prefer to rely on concrete experiences or facts instead of these kind of hypotheticals or speculation. If they are pressed on their beliefs, if they are pressed with these kind of hypotheticals, they can get extremely skeptical and critical and automatically, naturally, really revert back to what they know the best, what is familiar to them. I also want to highlight that because ISTJs really learn from their experiences, if an ISTJ has really experienced the worst, really has traumatic background, the ISTJ can become really protective in the sense that they really prefer not to put themselves in a situation of possible risk. So those ISTJs who have that kind of experience really prepare for the worst. But on the positive side, if ISTJ is kind of aspirational, optimistic with this function, then they really use this function to become more creative, try new things with curiosity, wanting to learn and experience new things. This function is nudging them to look look at these new possibilities and alternatives, kind of challenging the status quo that the ISTJ has. Overall, that was a short introduction for what ISTJ is. It's really important for ISTJs to learn as much as possible from the external, meaning reading a lot of books, gathering a lot of knowledge, as well as learning to question the collective thinking, but also making sure there's a foundation behind the criticism. ISTJs are the ones that will always be skeptical and critical of others, but then when they are asked the same question, what do you think about this? They might not always know the answer, or formulating the answer is difficult. So the ISTJ would have to learn to really build up their own opinions, build up their own knowledge of what do they think is true or false. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.